Right, let's get filming. Sorry for not making videos today. I was busy flying into my university, but I'm here now, and I'll be filming. Today's video will be a complete guide to foreign policy. Now, I say complete, I'll probably miss a few things, that's just life, but this should be a general summary of my stances on foreign policy and why I believe firmly in these stances. The US and its foreign policy will be used as an example for the sake of ease because I'm an American, so I have that perspective. Number 1. No friends, no enemies. There's a famous phrase, I'm paraphrasing of course, but the phrase goes along the line of, there are no friends in geopolitics, only interests. Essentially, I don't care whether you've stabbed us in the back previously or were close with us for 100 years. What matters firmly in the here and now is, what are our interests in your region, what are you doing as of now, and how does that impact the policy that we hold to you? For example, take the United States and Russia. The United States and Russia have a really notable history. Russia's gone from a friend who has helped us both in the revolution through tacit support and in the Civil War with active support, sending their navy to U.S. shores to inform the British and French that they are not to be trifled with, and that if they got involved on the Confederate side, they would be trifled with. Then they went to rivals, due to the fact that the Soviet Union decided to be, commies, and now they are rivals still. Though in between here there was some optimism, because there was the idea of Soviets are down, communism's over, maybe everyone can come together and be friends. Didn't happen. But now we're in a situation where they're competing with us for sphere of influence over a number of areas, including Syria, Ukraine, and elsewhere. Though the Syrian one has thankfully been reduced. But yeah, there's no friends or enemies really in foreign policy. Russia was an ally, in truth, not a friend. They were good for cooperation, good for trade, just good as an empire in terms of how they traded with us. The same is true with every member of NATO. Canada may have a history of friendship with the United States, but if they, say, became communist and started threatening to invade Alaska, well, then it doesn't matter how many years they've been our friend, air quotes there, if they are currently threatening us, they're still an enemy. They're still a rival geopolitically, or at the very least competition. So when you're thinking about foreign policy and what you would generally support, always keep that in mind. It does not matter how long someone has been close to us, or how many times we fought with them in the past. What matters is, right now, are they useful? And are they doing what we believe is right in terms of their governance of the territory they currently rule over? That's what matters. What is in the present? I have my opinions on Japan, for example, given World War II, but I'm not going to argue that the US should re-invade Japan and start prosecuting old people as war criminals. Second, all comes back to the leader. Now, what this means is essentially, as a influential power, things will affect you whether you like it or not, even if they happen outside of your soil. The US is a classic example of this because, as a great power, it was influencing the globe massively throughout the years. Now, it varied depending on the years, but still, over time, the US has caused fluctuations throughout the globe in many different sectors. But the reverse is also true. As its power block grew, and as its interests slowly but surely expanded outside of just the Western Hemisphere, things happening in other countries began to more and more impact the United States. If Europe went into a great upheaval like what happened with Napoleon, The US didn't really care at the time, other than the fact that the British were now raiding our ships that were trading. They most definitely care now because, well, let's say a great European scuffle happens again. Guess where our major trading partners are? Over there. Same as saying Hammond in Asia. We got plenty of trade with Asian countries, so if they started fighting, we feel it. Essentially, it doesn't matter whether you're the US, Russia, or the PRC. Fundamentally, your bloc will be impacted by you. And vice versa. Just as the United States encourages the Western world to adopt many of its beliefs, and Russia is the same with their bloc, and the People's Republic does the same with theirs, the impacts and what happens in those influenced countries will come back and affect the leader. So when people say, well, we're number one, we don't need anyone else, maybe we don't, but we're still impacted by what's happening overseas. That idiocy over there, because some moron decided to stop picking fights or managing their economy poorly, will come back to us, inevitably, whether we like it or not. 3. Liberty begets prosperity. Now, this may sound weird, but it is a general truth. Liberty, so long as it is restrained by proper behavior and conduct, which is enforced not through law, but through shaming and other social tactics. So long as the law is there to, stop criminals and such, generally leads to better quality of life. It isn't 100%, but it's pretty dang close. So the freer a people are, the more prosperous they are. And the more prosperous they are, the better they are to deal with and trade with. For example, who would you rather trade with? Country A or country B? One is a constitutional monarchy, which has a constitution and protects liberty. The other is a dictatorship, and it seizes property. Who would you rather trade with? Because I'll be frank, I think I'd rather trade with country A. Because fundamentally, no matter the flag, no matter anything else, this country will be more consistent and prosperous than this one. Think about it in terms of other countries that have existed. The UK is a constitutional monarchy that protects liberty with the Constitution. I say Constitution, a collection of bills and other acts that resemble a constitution. And it is far more prosperous than African countries, which are full of dictatorships that seize property of those they don't like. Don't get me wrong, the UK has its problems now, plenty of them, but it is by far more prosperous than the countries busy tearing themselves up over cattle or other insanity. I don't think any person reasonable living in the UK would rather live in Sudan right now. And for the US and other countries, these are better to have both as allies and also as trading partners. Because protecting liberty means protecting property. If you protect property, that means your investments in that country are safe. And that you can safely ensure that your businesses or your trade with that country go through. Essentially, they're reliable business partners. The whim of a dictator determines whether you keep your property in this dictatorship over here. That's not good for business, you, or the country in question. So when it comes to foreign policy, promote these countries. What if these countries keep going and they aren't planning on falling apart anytime soon? Well, it's simple. Intervene when necessary. Or, I should say more accurately, when best. Because keeping a country like this is to allow millions of people to suffer. Such a thing is an immoral act. It is inaction when action results in safety for many people. Thus, it is a net negative. So, overthrowing the governments is a good thing. I do not care how many people want to say, well, it's imperialism. Yeah, I freaking know that. That doesn't change the fact that we're overthrowing a despot. I would much rather trade on good terms with a puppet state that, although gained through imperialism and the loss of lives, actually values its people, a constitution, and liberty, than one that treats everything other than the leader as garbage. And in terms of interests, this is better for your main country too. Because ignoring the obvious costs of money and people that are needed to establish such a thing, trade's gonna go up, your people are gonna have more goods, their people are gonna have more goods, investment grows, GDP, and household income goes up. That's not to say that the costs don't exist, they certainly do. But would you rather have, on one hand, costs now to ensure that people are safe and that everyone benefits, or costs later when that dictatorship decides to blow up and now suddenly your investors are scrambling to figure out what the freak just happened, while your soldiers are likely going to get involved sooner or later because the UN said, hey, we need some troops to solve this problem. The UN may not do much, but it certainly calls up troops. And it wastes them, but it does call them up. And finally, expand influence. Now, there are many methods to expand your influence. And while generally it's good to go diplomacy first, the stick is still present. It will always be present. That may sound rude, crass, or cruel, but it is true. And fundamentally, it is a better choice than not having the stick as an option at all. Because, well, people take advantage when the stick is off the table. To give the poorly drawn dove. Because think about it. Imagine the Japanese Empire existed in the modern day. They decide to invade Taiwan. Reclaim some old territory. Guess what? If the US isn't willing to intervene and say, hey, no, you are not taking that island, guess what happens? The people suffer, die, and the empire doesn't learn. So it keeps expanding. Maybe it attacks South Korea next. Bloody, but it can still do it. Then North Korea. Again, nukes are a problem, but still theoretically feasible, assuming conventional war. And you see the problem. It keeps growing. Escalation. Until eventually, you're brought in regardless. In terms of scale, though, there is another thing to factor in. And I'd advocate going in this order. Start with diplomacy. Switch to financial influence. And then the stick. For example, how do you convince a person to do something? Well, you could ask them. If they refuse, give them an incentive, and if you must have them do it, you force them to. Same principle here. Negotiate, offer incentive, and if none, stick. Use force. Essentially, imperialism. Who am I kidding? It is imperialism objectively, but it is what's necessary to ensure the best for your country and other people if you actually use your influence properly. Well then, what is influence good for? Think about it. Why does a country benefit from influence? Sure, your companies could get in and make some money, but that means nothing if the country that is currently ruling wants to take their stuff. Well, that's what influence is for. It discourages behavior that is negative. Encourages good behavior, which is defined by the one with the influence, and can ensure lasting peace. Think about it. Who in their right mind would fight the British Empire at the peak of its power, post-World War I? Pre-Depression, post-World War I, with all the tools at the Empire's disposal, who in their right mind would fight the Empire? Pretty much no one. The Turks technically did, but even then, they were fighting on their home turf in terms of what they considered theirs, and the British did not care much about their territory. What were they getting out of it? A few slices of modern-day Turkey, plus, of course, they got Constantinople. That's about it. And sure, stealing the Hagia Sophia might have been nice for the British Museum, but they're not going to go through with it. Fundamentally, when you have influence, you can set the standard for how others behave. And that is very, very good in terms of ensuring lasting peace between peoples. The Boers were not fighting the Africans before Britain left. It was only when Britain left that the Boers decided to institute apartheid and suppress the Africans, with the Africans fighting back. That's just reality. Well, more or less. There's a lot more that makes it more complicated, but so long as the British were there and they had influence, they set the tone. That meant people followed their lead, especially in the Empire, but to a lesser extent in smaller countries in Europe as well. The Dutch took a lot of their cues from the British, so did the Belgians. And then, naturally, when the Empire fell apart, guess what? Everyone was scrambling to make up for that lost influence. Because with the power holder gone, now anyone could become that new power holder. And so that's why we see a lot of civil wars in old British colonies. Because a lot of people were looking for influence over territory, wealth, and a lot of other things too. Sometimes it was votes, sometimes it was money, land, culture, take your pick. But people wanted that influence that the British used to have, and it led to a lot of conflict. But if one country holds influence over the rest of the globe, they can set the terms for everyone else and ensure lasting peace is maintained. For example, if the US controlled the globe through indirect power and influence, it could ensure that other countries aren't fighting because they rely on the US for trade and training, are enacting laws that are beneficial to the average person, and are maintaining good trade practices, increasing wealth and ensuring prosperity. That is what it could do. Right now it can't because it doesn't have influence over the globe and it's turning in on itself. But global influence would do a lot of good for the US. That could do a lot of good for many countries. The US is just my home country, and you can definitely tell I have a preference for who wins. But as one final thing to leave off on, let me ask you, who were the people who brought the end to slavery for most of Africa? Do you think it was Ethiopia? Maybe it was some benevolent king in one of Africa's western territories. No, it was the United Kingdom. They sailed around West African shores, seizing slave ships, including Brazilian ones, by the way, which led to a lot of problems diplomatically, and said, "You are not trading slaves." They would free the slaves, often deporting them to Sierra Leone, which was their own ex-slave colony, or just releasing them. And they would go up to these African tribes who were still practicing slavery or selling them to Europeans and said, "You will knock it off, or we will invade you." And guess what? They did. Slavery was abolished in most of Africa thanks to Britain and the rest of Europe. Because when they came in, the British especially, because they were the first ones to really go ham on it, resulted in millions of slaves being freed because the slave kingdoms, Ashanti, Benin, Dahomey, didn't want to fight the Royal Navy. And so because of British influence, millions of people got to walk free. And their descendants are with us now in many of those countries. Do you want to know when Ethiopia finally abolished slavery? The 1930s. Yeah. It took to like the 1950s for the Saudis. That is how long it took for some of those countries to ban it. And the only reason they didn't have Britain knocking on their door was because Britain was in other parts of the globe. In fact, the Saudis actively took advantage of the fact that the British were occupied elsewhere with Iraq and other places and straight up invaded other countries. It's why they own Mecca. I'll leave you with that to think on, and I'll let you decide. Do you think military intervention is a good idea? Do you think influencing other countries is a good idea? Have a good one.